Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I wanted to thank our speakers for today, Stefanie and um, Kaya uh, Davies Hayon, who are our editors of the Transnational Arab Stardom. And Transnational Arab Stardom is the first study that's dedicated entirely to stardom on the Arab screen. So the collection highlights and explores Arab film screen, but also music stars, and it's something that I find really interesting is this intersection between music stars and film stars in Arab cinema. Um, but it's kind of exploring that intersectionality through a transnational and really an interdisciplinary lens. And it is contributing, I would like to argue, in one of the biggest contributors on Arab stardom literature, drawing on kind of not just kind of performance and film studies, but also feminism and film theory and media studies and sound studies. And so um, also, of course, celebrity studies and material culture and stardom, but it's quite vast in what it's doing. And so I'm really, really excited for today's presentation on Transnational Arab Stardom, which is the new book that was published 2023, I want to say. Is that correct? So yeah, just quickly before we start, I wanted to begin by saying that this is going to be the beginning of a series that we are doing. And it will be looking at different regional stars in new books and literature that have been recently published that are really kind of expanding the field. And one of the books are obviously Transnational Arab Stardom, which I think was really kind of groundbreaking in what it's doing, rather than kind of pinning down Arab stardom to a particular area. It's thinking about the ways that we can approach it. We can talk more a little bit about that. Um, so before we get started, I just want to introduce our speakers. First, we have Stefanie van de Peer, who researches feminist film histories in the Global South. She's a reader in film and media at Queen Margaret University, and she specializes in Arab and African women's cinema with a special interest in the period of the 1970s to about the early 2000s. Her publications include books and articles on topics related to women's presence and absence in film history for publications such as Transnational Screens, Open Screen, Alphaville, Film Philosophy, and Journal for Cultural Research. She is a very prolific writer, and her monograph, Negotiating Dissidents, the Pioneering Women of Arab Documentary with EUP, and there is the BAFTA Awards winning edited collection, Animation in the Middle East, under Ivy Taurus, came out in 2017. Other books obviously include Women in African Cinema and Transnational Arab Stardom with Kaya Davies Hayon, and Stretching the Archive Towards a Global Women's Film Heritage, which sounds like a fascinating project that I'm looking forward to reading. She's also the co-author of the monograph Refocus the Film of Anna Marie Jassir with Ikra Chima, which won the MECCSA Outstanding Achievement Award for the Best Monograph in 2024. So really nice to introduce you, Stephanie. We also have Kaya Davies Hayon. Nice to meet you. He is a lecturer in film and media at the Open University. Her research looks at the intersections of gender, ethnicity, and sexuality in contemporary Arab cinemas. And Kaya's first monograph, Central Cinema, The Body in Contemporary Maghrebi Film, was published in Bloomsbury in 2018. She's also published on contemporary Arab and African film in edited collection and special issues and journals, including Alphaville Journal of Film and Media and Studies in French Cinema. And Kaya has co-authored with Stefanie van de Peer an edited collection entitled Transnational Arab Stardom, Glamour, Performance and Politics, which, as we said, is recently published with a Bloomsbury Press. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your book and how you came across the idea of Transnational Arab Stardom as kind of a starting point for you to start this collection. And Stefanie and Kaya have prepared very kindly a really nice short presentation for us. So whenever you're ready, I would love it if you kind of share your screen with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Samar, for that very generous introduction and for this wonderful opportunity for Kaya and I to present our book. It's been a really wonderful collaboration, first of all, between me and Kaya as editors. We have worked together on quite a few things now, and it's a really great, productive collaboration. So we want to keep that going. And that was part of the inspiration behind the book as well, which I will talk a little bit about. One of the things, the reason why we wanted to start our presentation with this quite eye-catching slide is because we're very proud of the way the book looks. We are not the only contributors, we are just the editors, and we've each contributed a chapter. But when we sent their call for papers out into the world, Bahia Shihab got in touch with us and proposed that she could contribute to this book as well. But Kaya will tell you a lot more about that later on in this presentation. So I just wanted to highlight that at the start. It's a very eye-catching book. Obviously, for marketing purposes, that's always fantastic, but it also says something about our efforts to really make this theme stand out, draw attention to it, and do that in collaboration with important artists that are working in the Arab context, which we, as editors, are very aware we are not. We are scholars, we work in the UK, and we have our vision and our fandom of what we study. And that's what started this. So our friendship, our being colleagues in a similar field, having worked together before, and our fandom of Arab stars and our wish to share that fandom and share that admiration with a broader audience than we can. We can talk to each other about what we like, but we also want to talk to other people about these amazing people and these amazing films. So my personal fandom is this big star on the screen now. This is Hiam Abbas, a Palestinian actress who I hope many of us seeing her image will definitely recognize if you don't know her really well, because she is a very well-known star. She is the ultimate transnational Arab star for us. And she ignited this idea, this fandom that Kaya and I had in common ignited this, ignited our thinking about acting styles, about gender in transnational stardom in general, but in transnational Arab stardom in particular, because that's our research focus. We share that research focus. So we started looking about where the writing on Arab stardom is, and there are occasional chapters, occasional articles, but we wanted to bring like a sustained, cohesive attention to this region and the way that it functions in a global perspective. So we saw there was an absolute gap. It wasn't just, our personal fandom, there was also a gap in the scholarship. And people like you, Samar, you were contributing, but you're a few years behind us. So you were still in your PhD project while we were doing this project. And we have talked to each other, and we were initially hoping to have your chapter as well, but you were at the end of your PhD. So we really were looking at young academics to join us on this program. And that young field of academics comes with interdisciplinary lenses. That's just how I definitely see all our disciplines developing. So that was a really important sort of approach for us, something that inspired us at the start, which then translates into our conceptualization of the Arab star or the transnational Arab star as something really multifaceted. As you said, it's interdisciplinary, this whole book, but also our vision of what a star is interdisciplinary and is multifaceted. Like you said, we don't limit ourselves to film stars. We've also looked at music groups, singers, people that have crossed over between different art forms, as you'll see as we run through a couple of the chapters. And then our final point that we really wanted to consider in all of this is the idea that there is this dichotomy between the political significance of stars in general and then that idea of popular culture and how audience studies functions within star studies or, industry studies. So we wanted to make sure that our fandom shone through, but also the scholarship on transnational on transnational stardom. So we wanted to look at issues of glamour and the divadom, because if we think of Arab stars, we often start thinking of the divas like Kulthum, Feiruz, and those wonderful women. But we want to move beyond that idea. It's not just the diva, it's not just the glamorous woman. There's also elements of performance and the physicality of the actor that impact their stardom, as well as that bigger idea of the politics of the star in general, but the Arab star in particular. And with our feminist and our interdisciplinary and our intersubjective approach to this, all of those inspirations give shape to the start of this book, of this project with Kaya.
Thanks, Steph. So, yeah, I think it was really important for us when we were setting out the plans for the book to make sure that the collection was kind of broadening an understanding of the diversity of Arab stars and talking about kind of historical stars, but also contemporary stars and the relationship between them, and I guess broadening the idea of an Arab star as a concept. But we also wanted to make sure that we were incorporating the perspectives of scholars that are not only geographically dispersed, but also ethnically diverse and at different stages in their careers. So we really wanted to make sure that we were creating opportunities for early career researchers to be able to contribute their interdisciplinary knowledge on stardom to this collection. We also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just an academic collection, but that we were creating space for scholars, critics, and industry professionals to be able to collaborate with us, and in particular, those living and working in the region. And I'm really glad that we were able to include those voices, because we have contributions from filmmakers, from film critics in the collection, and I think that's really strengthened it. So we wanted to include a plurality of voices talking about Arab stardom, partly to kind of capture the diversity of stardom in the Arab world, but also because we wanted to avoid this really distanced academic perspective, which I think it's hard to achieve when you're talking about stardom anyway, because as Steph has already said, it's often kind of shot through with this veneration for stars and this fandom. And I think, when we were editing the work, we wanted to be careful that we weren't editing that out, and that people's really kind of subjective emotional responses to stars were still driving their contributions. So we've brought together academics, artists, filmmakers, and film critics from lots of different places, but including Latin America, Europe, the US, parts of Africa, and then parts of the Arab world as well, obviously. So in doing that, we've hoped to create a book on Arab stars that isn't just underpinned by Anglophone scholarship or by Euro-American perspectives on stardom, but that encompasses this very multi-directional and methodologically diverse approach, and that brings together different contributors with different backgrounds, different experiences, and different expertise, but all of whom share this kind of very deep-rooted affection for the stars that they're talking about.
Sorry, I've stopped sharing. Sorry, here we go. Sorry. Yeah, so we wanted to go a little bit deeper into how we came to our transnational approach. As I said, there was existing work on transnational stardom, and the way that really influenced us is important to acknowledge. So we have seen in existing work that there is a very broad understanding of the transnational circulation of stars, as well as their ability to act as sites of cross-cultural and ideological signification, so that political contribution that star studies makes to the field. But we've also seen trends in which very clearly there is a wish to undermine those traditional boundaries between the importance of Hollywood as almost a model versus any other region, and that sort of implied hierarchy there. We definitely wanted to contribute to the further undermining, the further destabilization of that dichotomy, of that hierarchy. And then we became really interested in the idea of translocal stardom. Like you said, somewhere in your introduction, we are interested in the transnational, but the transnational for us is very much connected to all other ways in which stars circulate around the globe. But around the globe doesn't mean from one end to the other. It could be on a shorter scale, on a more modest scale within a region or beyond a region. So we definitely wanted to bring that in as well, because certain stars function in different contexts with different audiences, and that needed to be acknowledged. So we've emphasized that regionality, both in terms of there being an immense global demographic of diasporic Arab stars, and those working within contexts like Hiyam Abbas, the Palestinian context, that is in and of itself entirely transnational, but also very localized. So that's the kind of two sides of the story we wanted to bridge, rather than, emphasize hierarchies that might exist already. So
can I say one thing, Steph, as well? I think we really wanted to not lose sight of the post-colonial and the diasporic when considering the transnational as well, because I think we've noticed that there are still kind of networks or avenues that are opened or closed to you dependent on the kind of post-colonial and now neo-colonial relationships that had existed in the region previously. And so that was something that was really important to us not to lose sight of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that informed our approach, that so totally saturated our approach. That's very important for us. So yeah, we look at transnational lives, diasporic Arab stars, stars with Arab heritage, and that idea, especially of multilingual, multinational, and those, personal subjective biographies that a star carries with her or with him across borders as they are crossed. To continue a little bit on from that, I've highlighted here the designed photograph or image of Mashru Leila, a Lebanese band that has definitely crossed a lot of borders in an intersectional way, an all-encompassing intersectional way. And so they also embody in many ways that really complex neo-post-colonial present of a country that is under siege from all sides. At the same time, we root and we recognize in our work that origin of any star system in the Arab world in the Egyptian model. The contribution of the Egyptian model is incredibly important. It has served as a model in some context. It has served as something to disrupt in other contexts. So it's important to acknowledge that. And so there is, on balance, a large number of Egyptian stars in our book as well. That was just, a reflection of the reality of the Arab star system. So yeah, the Arab star for us, and especially the transnational, the cross-regional Arab star, is all sorts of things. They are transnational. They encompass a range of national, regional, global, religious, ethnic, linguistic identities, and all other types of stardoms. And they span all those stardoms. Our book spans all those stardoms from the start of Arab cinema to the contemporary period, and we hope beyond as well. So back to Kaya, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the actual structure of the book and how we came up with that.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of talk through the structure and talk a bit about some of the work by our contributors, because that work made it the collection that it is. So it's divided into three kind of overlapping parts that bring together analyses of Arab stars, which do highlight their transnational dimensions, but also remain very attentive to local and national histories and contexts as well. So we begin with an exploration of divadom, glamour, and iconicity. Then we engage in the second section with the intersections of gender, sexuality, and class. And then we look in the final section more at kind of politics and ideological readings of stars, but there's crossover across all of the sections, obviously. We tried to, in some ways, map a kind of chronological reading of stars by starting in the beginning with the earlier stars, the stars of the golden era, but again, there is crossover, and we do have some of the kind of first stars of Arab and African cinema, for instance, in the later sections of the book. So the first part of the book, The Arab Diva, Glamour in Pan-Arab Performers, includes contributions that examine stars who gained recognition across the region and sometimes globally for their glamour and their charisma. And these contributions all highlight the limitations of Western models for understanding stardom from the Arab world, and they unpick how concepts like myth, icon, and diva relate to Arab stars. So we've got in this section work by Laura Lohman on the Egyptian singer Kulthum, by Sharifa Zuhur on the Syrian star Asmahan, Carolina Bracco on the Egyptian belly dancer Tahia Carioca, Barbara Lebrun on the pan-Arab and cosmopolitan star Dalida, and then we have Salma Yassin and Vicky Panossian on the Lebanese singer and national icon Fayrouz. So as I've said, this is the most kind of historically grounded section, and it primarily looks at the divas of the golden age, some of whom have very musical backgrounds, and we're kind of interested in how those backgrounds interact with the screen. So how there is this, it always seems to be the case in Arab stardom, but this very, very close link between music and performance in film stardom. Then the second section, the intersections of gender, class, and sexuality in Arab stardom, brings together contributions that look at how gender, sexuality, and class interact in the on-screen and off-screen representation and circulation of Arab stars' images. So Wessam El-Maligi looks at the roles of the Egyptian actresses Faten Hamama and Hind Rostom, and how they were often kind of pitted against each other and embodied different versions of Egyptian femininity. My chapter looks at the stardom of the Moroccan-Belgian actress Lubna Azabal, and looks in particular at her roles post 9/11, where she's more often than not, embodied terrorist subjects. Then we have Lowry Martin's work, which looks at the queer Lebanese band Mashru Leila, which Steph just mentioned. And then Dina Mohammed Abdel Al-Salam's work looks at elderly Egyptian stars in independent Egyptian cinema. So looking at a very different star system to the kind of dominant star system in Egypt. And then the third section is, thanks, Steph. Power and politics, the ideologies and reception of Arab stars, and that brings together work examining the intersections of power, politics, and entertainment in Arab stardom. So lots of scholars say that you can't really understand Arab stardom without really understanding its political dimensions, and understanding that the political is a really important category of analysis for Arab stardom. And I do tend to agree with that. So this section begins with Steph's chapter, which looks at the first African and Arab stars, Habibim Sika and Heidi Chikli, both of whom are actually Jewish as well. And Steph's work problematizes archival practices and canon formation, and I'm sure you'll talk a bit about it in the discussion, Steph. Next, we have Ifdal El-Sakat's work, which looks at the relationship between Egypt's major stars of the Golden Age and the Egyptian political classes and the Free Officers movement. Then we have the filmmaker Mark Lotfi's work, where he writes up the research that he's done on a planned biopic on Omar Sharif. Hania Nashef contributes work on the reluctant stardom of the Palestinian director Elias Suleiman, and Will Higby looks at Jamal Debbouze through the lenses of transnational, diasporic, and intersectional stardom, and thinks about how he negotiates both his kind of French and Arab identities in different contexts and at different times. So I wish I could talk more about the work of the contributors, because all of the chapters are brilliant. But hopefully the overview gives you a kind of sense of the multi-directional, methodologically diverse approach that the collection has tried to embody, and also of how we've tried to kind of broaden understandings of transnational Arab stardom as a concept, and of kind of raise awareness of different transnational Arab stars as well, I think. So as Steph mentioned at the beginning, when we first put out the call for papers for this book, we were approached by the multidisciplinary artist and activist Bahia Shihab, who works in Egypt, is Egyptian, and she asked us if she could create visual images to accompany each star in the collection. We were delighted, of course, to accept her offer. And so we were lucky enough to have been able to accompany each chapter in the book with a visual interpretation that was created by Bahia in collaboration with young Egyptian artists in a workshop that she ran in 2023, I think, at the American University in Cairo. So the artworks accompany each chapter in place of an abstract, I guess. So they're kind of a visual response to the work of each contributor. And I think they really enhance the arguments, and they create this beautiful dialogue between image and text, which I guess we're always trying to do in film studies anyway, and in particular in relation to stars. So I've included a few images. Steph and I have included a few of her artworks throughout the presentation, but there's a few more on this slide now. We were lucky enough to be able to include them in print in the book, and they really do add something, I think, to the argument. So delighted to have been able to include those. And I think that's it.
So that's it from us, Samar, but we are very open to questions from you or from anybody in the audience.
Well, thank you very much. That was truly a fascinating presentation, and it gives us a really thorough, I would say, thorough presentation on the book, your approach, and how you kind of came up with that. I'm sure also others who are present who have a kind of a lot of questions that would lead up into the discussions. But if you don't mind me starting, I hope I can take this point. You covered a lot of some of the things that I found really fascinating, but one of the things that I found really interesting about your saying is your approach to an Arab stardom, or a transnational Arab stardom in particular. And often what you were saying is you were trying to include different aspects of the region. You were trying to be as versatile as possible. And I guess the question is then to you both, or how would you say, what is a transnational Arab stardom, right? So in a region that is incredibly kind of porous, right? In its stardom, as you were saying, there's the regional stardom, but then there is the fact that stars are not necessarily bound by, you get music stars who are doing films all the time. Abdul Halim, Kulthum, all these were stars that initially were music stars, and then they were doing cinema. So there is kind of this porous within the industry themselves, within the creative field itself, and it's all highly interconnected. But then there is also the transnational Arab stardom, as in within the region, right? So there is different ways in which we can approach a transnational Arab star, as you were saying. So what is a transnational Arab star? What is an Arab star within that? How do you theorize that? And it's a big question.
Yeah, I think it's almost impossible to understand. I think it's kind of impossible to understand Arab stars without seeing them as transnational, because, like you've just said, stardom in the region is so porous, and it's very. I mean, most stars in the Arab world circulate regionally and are known across the region. And have these kind of multinational biographies. They perform in different languages. They embody different nationalities, different cultures, different ethnicities. They have this appeal across different linguistic and national contexts. So I think they kind of circulate in this already porous space, but that their star images themselves are often kind of reliant on this kind of cross-cultural exchange between the local and the global, and the national and the transnational. So I think it's really hard to take an Arab star and say they belong to this national cinema, I don't know what you think, Steph.
Yeah, and I think the same is true overall. I think trying to define what an Arab star is, what Arab means, what a star is, what is transnational, all of those terms in themselves are really porous and have definitions redefined, restructured, rethought all the time. So I think what Kaya and I would probably say is that there is no definition of a transnational Arab star. It all depends on your approach. And that's why I think we keep emphasizing that word. We are a particular type of viewer. We are a particular type of author. We are a particular type of scholar. We have to bring that with us. And that's why our introduction to the book is quite important to us. But that's because that's where we paint a picture of what we mean by transnational. By transnational, we mean, we're going at this from all the knowledge that is there, that is available to us. And we're using all of that and trying to figure out how they fit and how they disrupt how Arab stars fit in and disrupt that effort towards the definition. And the same is true for terminology like Arab. What is Arab? Arab doesn't exist. It's a concept. It's totally abstract. It doesn't apply to everyone we talked about even. We've included Jewish stars. We've included Tamazight stars. We've included ideas of the Kurdish film as well. So there's like Kaya said, I think all of those identities are so inherently transnational, so inherently Arab and non-Arab, and so inherently both popular and unpopular all at the same time, that I think that word of regional, multidirectionality, like transdisciplinary, that's where we have to look for it rather than like a definition or one concept. It's much more about how you work on it together to give shape to something that doesn't have a shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's sorry, Kai, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say I completely agree, because I think when we were writing the introduction and trying to kind of, define your terms, which you tend to do in an introduction to an academic book, we were just like, well, it's so hard to define these terms in this context because the models don't necessarily fit the region, and so these stars are getting us to push the boundaries of our academic thinking about this area. And like Steph said, even trying to define the word Arab and what is the Arab world, and which stars get to be included in a collection on Arab Stardom is really challenging. And that's why we were really, really keen to include, like Steph said, Amazigh stars, Jewish stars, Christian stars, Muslim stars, stars that are agnostic or atheist stars, because we wanted to show the kind of plurality of identities that circulate in the region, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think something that I've also kind of would agree with what both of you saying about this idea when we think of the region and we think about what is Arab. And to me, something that, as someone who is both Egyptian but also an Arab, something that I always say is it's not roots, it's roots, right? So it's not about the roots of where the actual roots onto the ground, but the roots in which people find themselves in the region, you know? And I think you'll find that a lot when you're trying to look into the region and you're doing the research on the region, be it kind of Arab star or filmmakers, you will end up finding these, as you were saying, this multifaceted, regional aspects that is coming across, and without knowing it, that kind of dichotomy of a national or transnational is in itself kind of problematic because, as you both said, and as we saying, it is by default so porous. One thing will lead to another. It will eventually kind of, have some sort of impact, even if it's not direct impact, but it will somehow be as one could say, some sort of a result of lead into it. In the same way that kind of the Egyptian star system, and you say maybe if we say this as the origins, But then if we look at the Egyptian star system and then we look at kind of the transnational Arab stardom now, it is so far removed.
Yeah.
Well, kind of removed, but not so far removed. But obviously, again, we're kind of looking into how it's progressed, how it has evolved.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a question for you, I guess, in comparison to, what you thought of the origins of that kind of Egyptian star system, which is, kind of the regular kind of studio system on a much smaller scale or whatnot. In comparison to kind of a contemporary transnational Arab star, what are some of the changes that you've noticed or the evolution and some of the similarities that kind of you've come up from these kind of edited collections and the similarities or not?
I think when Kaya and I now talk about this project, I think, well, both of us, I'm sure, I don't want to speak for you, Kaya, but I'm assuming that you, as well as me, we learned a lot, because stardom is a specific route, as you say, into understanding an industry that is huge, that, we are able to consider from lots of different angles, but we chose stardom here. And it helped me, at least, to understand how it is, like you say, about roots. It's about traveling. It's about how you circulate, or how a star like Hiyamabas, like Kulthum, like anyone, how they circulate on a network of consumption. And so it depends on what the medium is. So in the past, that may have been the silver screen. Now, that is our screen at home. Or any, music videos are important in the whole history, but of Arab stardom. But they've changed over the years, and they keep changing. Likewise, the consumption of those images changes, because people have different attitudes towards not only the media, like whether it's TV or film or a film festival, or whatever situation you consume images in, but you're also, when you're dealing with stars, also you're relating yourself to the person on the screen and who they represent in physical terms, in ideological terms, through their bodies. So the consumption of those images is really important in the understanding, the global understanding of what an Arab star might be. And that's also why that changes constantly, depending, very sadly, mostly on the way that the Arab world or conflict in the Arab world features in mainstream media. Those perceptions of what is Arab are not constantly in flux, they're also constantly questioned and challenged and done, and that is done in this hugely public space. And so stereotypes change, but they remain. They don't remain the same. They're just there. They take different shapes. So I think that's important for both Kaya and I, and our understanding and our approach to stardom and the way that we've developed since bringing stardom into our study of the Arab world. Kaya, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about your feelings about that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think, just on that point of how we become aware of stars and how we consume star images today, I think so much has changed because of like the digital era and digital disruption, and how we're able to encounter star bodies from outside of the place in which we live, basically. And I think in some ways that has afforded small national cinemas opportunities, but in some ways it has created lots of obstacles, because I mean, Steph and I were talking before we came on the call about how the film infrastructure in lots of these places is really unstable. There isn't much support for film production, distribution, or exhibition. There's hardly anywhere to watch films in countries like Tunisia or Morocco. So most people are watching streamed films or pirated films. And I think that does have implications for how stars' images are able to circulate, because in some ways, like the kind of rise of streaming and of streaming platforms that are actually particularly focused on Arab cinema create some opportunities for people within the diaspora and also within the region to see these stars. But otherwise, I guess it's a case of films being selected at film festivals and then them circulating kind of beyond the Arab world. And certain types of films will be able to go on that journey, and other types of films won't. So certain stars, certain actors are going to become visible outside of the Arab world, and others won't. And often the ones that do become visible might become visible because a particular political and cultural moment, they speak to the idea that we have of the Arab world. And I think at the moment, you know, I think certain stereotypes of Arab women in particular are re-emerging and recirculating. And I think that's why Arab stars, Arab women stars, are so critical for kind of pushing back against some of those images. And, you know, maybe they're cast because for a certain reason, but then what they do is actually a bit more subversive. So Hima Abbas is like a really interesting star in that regard, or the star that I was talking about, Lubna Azabal, or, you know, lots of other stars are doing something quite subversive when they might actually be casting quite stereotypical roles as like an oppressed woman or a terrorist, for instance.
No, absolutely. And I think this is absolutely true, right? Like most often we think of Arab stars as kind of cultural ambassadors one way or another, right? And so there is, in one way, the transnational career kind of shapes that mobility, both kind of in terms of local, but also in terms of the, you know, the global markets, right? And so there are those who are provided, as you were saying, with more agents, right? And Hima Abbas is kind of the classical example of that, because her career is very, very interesting. It is. I mean, I don't know, going to have the time to go into it. Obviously, you guys are the experts on this. But yeah, so her career is very interesting, and it is very much kind of, as you're saying, subversive, and yet at the same time very political, but subversive in what it's doing in terms of the politics. But then, as you were saying, there are others who are instead kind of subjected them into kind of the global stage, is subjecting them to these, you know, stereotypical roles. You know, go out and do the little terrorist, because that's, you know, what's kind of the you know, the representation post 9/11 has shifts back and forth, as Stefanie was saying, depending on kind of the global conflict of the era. But yeah, I guess kind of the question then becomes, you know, how do we think, or this is a big question, and I know it differs from case to case, but how is it that they kind of negotiate their identities between the Arab cinemas and the global cinemas and the industries that are kind of functioning on different levels, if you know what I mean? Because they're not necessarily a dichotomy, and I don't necessarily think that they're a hierarchy, but there are certainly ways in which they're almost kind of not oppositional, but different identities for most of these stars. Not all of them, of course, but some of the kind of the stars that were kind of pointed in the book. So just wanted to kind of hear your thoughts about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think a star's Arabness is sometimes emphasized and de-emphasized in different contexts and at different stages in their careers, and depending on different political and cultural circumstances. And I think some of our contributors talk about, for instance, Dalida, and how her Arabness was emphasized at certain times, and that often coincided with points in time where France was building kind of better relations with Egypt, for instance, or, you know, Will Higby, I think, talks about Jamel Debbouze and how his Moroccanness is sometimes emphasized, but then his Frenchness is emphasized in different contexts. So I think there's this kind of negotiation by the stars themselves, also by the production companies, by marketing companies, and that are very much related to wider geopolitical issues. Yeah.
Totally agree. I don't have anything to add there.
No, yeah, absolutely. Sarah just has a question. Sorry, I've realized I've been talking for so long. Sarah, please, if you
no,
have
that's
a question,
fine. I'm just going to lower my hand whilst I remember to do it. I had a question, not a question, you know, kind of a wonderful observation about the way the book was structured, and the idea of the diva. And I thought this might be a useful point to bring it in, because we've already talked a little bit about kind of gender, but also kind of oppositional kind of stances as well, really. And I teach a module on stardom and celebrity, and last year I introduced a session on the diva, just as a kind of emblematic concept. not a type as such, but the conceptual kind of framing of the diva is partly as a way to deal with intersectionality in a useful way. So I think that, and so to hear that you have there's a section on the diva from this perspective here is brilliant. I've kind of made notes here, kind of going, right, let's get this in. Let's kind of think about how we can kind of think of it. So in terms of, my question is really, can you say a bit more about this? But I'll frame it in a slightly different way. It was, did that sense of the diva framing emerge in your responses to the call, or was it something that you wanted, something that you kind of commissioned towards? Was it a kind of something that appeared, or something you thought we must have this in there?
Kaya, if you don't mind, I'll start on this one, and perhaps you can round off. I think when we started thinking about this, as I said, it was Hiyam Abbas who sparked all the ideas initially. But then, of course, when you start thinking about Arab stars and history, the first person that comes to mind is Kulthum. She's the music absolutely singer, but she's also an actress. So she really encompassed everything that people expect to see when you're talking about an Arab star. In our perception at the start, we fandom of Hiyam Abbas, but consideration of people like Kulthum. And then we started thinking, okay, so our concept is really broad because those two function on a completely different level. They're, I would say they're not hard to compare, but you wouldn't naturally be inclined to compare them. It could be a challenge. So that really broadened our understanding from the start. Whereas both Kaya and I are really interested in political feminism in our other work, here we're like, no, actually, this is really important to include that stardom and that really important contribution to the understanding of stardom as an Arab thing in cinema, because it became in some ways a model almost. This idea of the virtuous, politically aligned, supported diva who does good just by being and doing and performing. So it perhaps started from, oh, there's this other thing that we need to do, but then that full embrace, because Hiyam Abbas also, later on, we realized, has that diva-ness in her, diva-dom, diva-ness in her, and it's part of her particular acting style, almost, I would say. So we didn't have a preconceived idea. It arose, but then we fully embraced it and thought this is really, really important for our broadness of our understanding of the term. Hiya.
But I think it really came through in the contributions to the call for papers. Like, so many of the contributors wanted to talk about this particular type of stardom and how divadom has influenced their interpretation of Arab stars and is so key to understanding the kind of category of Arab stardom, I guess. But yeah, like Steph said, I think there's been more contemporary, there are more kind of contemporary stars and contemporary films that also are like really venerate the older divas of the golden age of Egyptian cinema, and there's this real nostalgia for that era that's re-emerging, I think, in contemporary representations and in contemporary iterations of stardom in the region. And that we've seen this real, I think, and something that I'm really interested in, is this real kind of reclaiming of belly dance and of performance and musical melodramas and that type of genre and that type of stardom appearing again in the contemporary period. And I think that's something that needs more exploration and something that I'm really interested in. Yeah.
Great, thanks. It's partly the sense because you started by talking about models that don't work from essentially the Hollywood model. As a follow-up, this doesn't have to be discussed a lot. I don't want to kind of stand in the way of others, but is the idea, the concept of the diva, something that can work across boundaries or without that hierarchy between existing Western-centric, or is it an application of a Western-centric things? And if anyone wants to jump with a different question, that's fine, but absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Well, in simple terms, I would say it's multi-directional again, but in very simple terms. But I do think that idea of the diva, not the performance of the diva, but the idea of the diva and how that develops, I think is multi-directional. But yeah, something to think about, something to explore. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks.
No, absolutely. I mean, thank you so much for this question. And it's a really, really interesting question. And Eleanor, I will come to you, I promise. Because I think you are right, particularly about this idea of the concept of the diva, not just kind of multi-directional, but kind of timeless even. And it's kind of reclaiming, as you were saying, in different forms, right? So the diva as you're saying, in the time of Kulthum is different than the diva of the 1980s, for example, in the Arab cinema, right? In comparison to kind of a contemporary diva. And it's almost kind of like an evolution of the concept, but each one is trying to both kind of situate in it and kind of contextualize it, but also add to it. And it becomes then a concept that then, how do we analyze the diva if everyone's kind of adding to it and it's constantly changing, constantly evolving? And as you were saying, yeah, it's certainly, I think, a topic that requires a bit more research. And yeah,
I think the direction that film studies is taking with this interest in cinema history and the sort of the social history around the experience of cinema and the audience and the interaction between audiences and actors is really interesting for us to be part of. I love this direction that we're going in. I think, finally we're looking at what the event of cinema meant or has meant in history, but how does that impact the way we are viewing cinema now and how that develops, that relationship between audience member and the star on the screen.
No, absolutely. And I think it's also really important that, I know I've done a circuit at the moment is doing work on like reception studies of audience in the 1960s. But I think what's really interesting is what happens when the audience is kind of, these films are being recirculated. How are kind of contemporary audiences are then also kind of negotiating these identities with the star. So it's not just about the 1960s audiences, but also contemporary audiences and, their relationship with these films. And I think that's, to me, is also a really kind of interesting point of discussion. But I will give Eleonora the chance to speak because I've been talking for too long.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to sort of like follow up because it's related to what we're talking about in relation to divas, and I find it really interesting. I work on Hollywood musicals, and very often when we find crossover stars, they often star in musicals because they are singers, but they still this sense of them needing to prove that they are also actors, right? Instead, from what you're saying, it seems that it's much more porous in terms of these stars you are and these divas you are talking about. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit more about this sort of like porousness between film, music and other media, and how much, for example, their own musical identity informs their screen identity, and how perhaps it has changed in more recent years. You also mentioned music videos. So if you can expand a bit about this kind of porousness between music and film, which I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, because I just wanted to mention to Samad as well, we are, we're kind of mostly focusing on stars that are sort of generally approved by the sort of establishment, but we also have included some controversial stars that are not sort of, maybe high profile is the wrong word, but that are not classically understood as easily as, anyway, disruptors. Let's call them disruptors. So we've got Mashru Leila, the musical group from Lebanon. They are not film stars, and we wanted to be quite broad in our understanding of stardom and the impact of music, as you mentioned, Eleonora, on Arab film, Arab cinema history is immense. I mean, it's you cannot overemphasize it. And again, a really good example is of course Kulthum. But there is also the more contemporary crossover artist, and I've currently forgotten his name. Kaya, do you remember the controversial star?
Mohammed Ramadan.
Yeah, Mohammed Ramadan, you know, much more controversial, but also sometimes described as a diva. Also got that crossover element. He became a rapper or hip hop, but I don't really know how I would describe the music genre, and became really popular in sub-Saharan Africa. And really, you know, built that into his perception of his own stardom, his persona, the way he enacts himself when he's being interviewed or when he features on YouTube videos and things like this. So, you know, we try to do that too, like bring those more controversial stars in that go across media platforms and do something else than what we classically associate with the diva or the musical star. Kaya, maybe you have a little bit more on Mashhur Leila's queer side or queer elements of Arab stardom in general.
I don't know. I think I was going to say that I think maybe, and I don't know, Samar, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but maybe at the beginning, film was kind of a vehicle for showcasing the musical star in the Arab in Egypt, definitely. So if you're thinking of stars like Kulthum, then the film became another way to showcase her talent and her virtue and her piousness and all of the things that she embodied. Whereas now I think it's kind of less just a way to do that. I think film's got its own kind of identity, but I think because of the cultural history, music is just so intertwined with film still, and with the performance of stars in the Arab world. I won't talk too much about Mashhur Leila because I don't know too much enough about them to talk about them with any authority, but I think it's interesting to think about queerness in the context of stardom in the Arab world and about kind of sexual subversion, I guess, within the context of stardom in the Arab world, because you know, I think there are still restrictions on what stars can do and embody in different nation states in the Arab world. And I think that some stars have faced some quite severe repercussions because of performances that have been more sexually subversive, not even necessarily queer. But I'm thinking, for instance, of Lubna Abida, who's a Moroccan actress in a film Much Loved, and she played a sex worker and was kind of violently attacked in the street because of that, and then had to move out of Morocco. She couldn't stay there anymore. So I think it's difficult still for stars to push the boundaries too much in certain spaces. And I think sometimes that can lead to stars like, you know, who have Arab heritage but live in the global north, then being able to embody these more subversive roles because they're kind of safer, I guess, in terms of their ability to do that. So, yeah, I think it would be really interesting to look in more detail at queerness and how that intersects with stardom in the Arab world. And I think that the collection has started to do that with regards to certain stars, but I think there's a lot more to explore there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I think there is, I mean, the musical question, first of all, is a really kind of complex one, right? Because, you know, in terms of Egyptian cinema in particular here, that's what I have expertise really. When we think of a star like Kulthum or Muhammad Abdul Wahab, we don't have a musical genre. We have a musical stars that then, whereas you were saying, Kaya, builds kind of the films are built around a musical star, and that's when you get the musical. Now I think it's a bit more kind of complicated and complex. Obviously, film since then has evolved far more than the 1930s and was Bida, for example, right? So you are kind of getting that distinction on the one hand. On the other side, when you're talking about kind of queerness in Arab stars, and not just kind of queerness, but as you're saying, just kind of any sort of pushing the boundaries and the subversion of stars, I think as you were saying, within kind of the local context, it is much, much harder to do that in comparison to kind of the global, right? And that's precisely what kind of some of these stars are doing with negotiating the local and then the global, or even not even the global, the regional or the global regional, right? And that's kind of what Mashroor Layla does. Interestingly, is that in the context of, if you read kind of Mashroor Layla in the context of Lebanon in particular, they are one thing. But if you read that in the context of somewhere like the Gulf or Egypt, where there are, more restrictions over some of the kind of subversions that they're doing, their identity itself is shifting on how people are reading that. And I think that's, a conversation to be had. I am very much aware of time, but I do have one final question, which again, it's kind of an open question that isn't really kind of going to be answered in the 2 minutes that we have left. But I wanted to ask you about, where do you see the future of transnational Arab stars going forward from here? From this kind of point in the kind of 2024, where are we going forward? Both in terms of kind of the labor, in terms of the politics, in terms of the culture, in terms of the ambassadors, but even in terms of like our role as academics writing on, stardom and transnational stars. And what do you where do you see kind of we are us and stardom, Arab transnational stardom going from here? So again, very big question.
Do you want to start, Steph, or shall I? You start.
Off the top of my head, I feel, we've only just started. You are the future of Arab star studies. We've touched on lots of different things. I think we've painted a little bit of a picture of some kind of development since the beginning of Arab cinema, I guess, with those big stars. But I think in general, the future is in that multi-platform, circulation of images, the opening up and closing down of boundaries online, how we negotiate that in a political terms. Just think of geo-blocking, like just in general, accessibility of Arab cinema on our screens here is not developing in the good direction, in my opinion. I think it's becoming more and more hard to see the content we want to see. So I think there's some disruption to do. I think the young scholars now need to have a lot of work ahead of them. I think there's a lot of boundaries that need to be broken. Anti-canonical work, anti-colonial, anti-racist, feminist work needs to be done, because women, however much they are described as divas, they don't feature dominantly in the narrative, in our film history. They're not there. So we need to give them the place and the space that they deserve, and at the same time make sure that those boundaries that we feel now in terms of accessibility of films and accessibility to stars doesn't keep limiting us in what we can see, and how the world, puts on these blinders and just doesn't have that open mind enough to connect with people from other cultures as stars, not within the system that you're used to, but within an open system with a future that can change. Sorry, this is very idealistic, but yeah, that's me.
Oh, but it's necessary. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Steph has said. I think that the digital era is going to be interesting and will afford opportunities as well as kind of significant challenges. I think there's work to be done around the conditions of the film industries and the impact of that on stardom. I really think there's a lot to be done around women's labour conditions historically and in the contemporary era. And I would love to read more about, how the Me Too movement took root in certain, maybe not to the same extent that it did in the global north, but how did that emerge in the Arab film industries? What did that look like? And, I struggled to find much stuff on that. I would love to know more about that. So I think there's a lot to be done about labour conditions for women, in particular, women stars. I hope that we'll start to see more about queer stars and queerness in the region and how that's intersecting with stardom. And then I think as academics, the work that we need to do is I think that our work needs to be much more rooted in collaboration between Global North and Global South. And I think that there needs to be much more collaboration across academic and practical spaces. And I think we really need to be engaging with the work of film practitioners, broadly conceived, so the kind of various roles that film practitioners can occupy. I think we can only learn from a breaking down of those barriers. And I think we've tried to do a bit of that in this collection. And it is challenges because you're coming from completely different kind of different backgrounds, but I think it can be really productive. And I think, collaborations with artists, things like that, can be incredibly valuable as well, and can lend different understandings of different concepts and different ideas. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's great. Okay, I am over time. I wanted to thank you both so much for today. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for such an enriching discussion. I've taken a lot from it, and I think there's a lot for me to also go away and think about and be like, okay, where do we go from here? But yeah, congratulations on such an amazing edited collection to both of you. This will also, like I said, the recording will go up with a link of the book for those who are interested. It's a great book. I would certainly recommend giving it a read. And thank you both so much for today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Bye.